This month, April 2020, sees the 404th anniversary of Shakespeare's death, probably the 456th anniversary of his birth. Plague and pestilence not only feature in his plays, but were part of the background of his life. As an infant, he lived through a huge outbreak of the plague in Stratford-upon-Avon, and when, at the height of his writing career, the London theatres were shut for a total of 78 months in the decade from 1603 to 1613, some 60% of the time. His landlady in London, Marie Mountjoy, fell victim to the plague in 1606. It's interesting to reflect on the official response to plague in his time, in particular the orders issued by King James on the 30th of July 1603. Some aspects resonate quite closely with our experience during the coronavirus pandemic in 2020. Other aspects are a little different. Responsibility in 1603 fell principally upon the justices, physicians, ministers, churchwardens, and various individuals they were charged to appoint to different roles. The response in 1603 had an economic aspect, but not in terms of business support, rather in terms of poor relief. In 1603 there was no voluntary sector to call upon, no food banks, so the response was through official channels. Justices were to provide relief for the poor and all those who were infected by a collection, charging the special persons of wealth in their area, and if need, by seeking help from adjoining areas. Provision of victuals, corn, bread, other meat, fire, medicine, were all specifically to be provided for the poor. Where clothing or bedding was to be destroyed because of the infection, then the poor were to be allowed relief in recompense of their loss. Any wealthy who were being isolated were to be supplied, but at their own charge. Persons were to be appointed to view the bodies of all that died and certify the cause of death. This effectively extended the role of coroner to cover all deaths during the period of the plague. 1603 saw its own form of social distancing. Houses where any was sick with the plague or had died of it were to be shut up for 6 weeks after the sickness. In a town, neighbours would be similarly isolated. In rural areas where it was necessary for folk to tend cattle or otherwise work, then individuals were to maintain isolation from others and to wear a mark or carry a white rod. Watchmen were there to ensure the rules were observed. Any inn or alehouse where infection was present had to take down its sign and replace it with a mark denoting the presence of the sickness. Those providing and delivering relief or undertaking watch duties were also not to associate publicly. They were similarly to wear a mark or carry a white stick so that others might avoid them. Those providing and delivering relief or undertaking watch duties were also not to associate publicly. They were to wear a mark, carry a white stick so that others might avoid them. Remedies were to be prescribed by physicians. Information about remedies was to be provided in every town by public notice, but in reality there were no effective remedies available in 1603. And for the present, our NHS provides care and treatment under significant pressure, but without curative medicine or vaccine availability. In 2020, we've heard concerns raised about reporting of numbers of death and their causes, about hospital-only figures being less than a full picture. In 1603, there were to be weekly returns to the justices of the numbers infected, those that did not die, those that did, and probable causes of death, returns to be made by ministers, curates and churchwardens. The justices were to review these reports every 3rd week and make their own report to the Privy Council in respect of the infection and of the relief provided. Bearing in mind the means of communication then and now, it's arguable they set a higher standard of reporting than is currently evident. Clergy thus had a wider role in 1603, but the leading of funerals remains a constant, and 2020 has been seriously distressing for families who've had to have very simple ceremonies and look to hold perhaps some memorial services later in the year. In 1603, the curates present at burials, which were to be at dusk, after sunset but while still light, were told that they must keep distant from the corpse and from those bringing the corpse to the grave. And just as we've been warned to keep the rules about social distancing, so in 1603 anyone publishing opinion contrary to keeping distance from the infected was to be punished. Clergy by being forbidden to preach, laity by threat of imprisonment. Shakespeare's plays have many references to plague, pestilence and social distancing. In Romeo and Juliet, the friar, who's tasked with telling Romeo that Juliet is feigning death, is frustrated in his mission, for The searchers of the town, suspecting that we both were in a house where the infectious pestilence did reign, sealed up the doors and would not let us forth. Perhaps the words of Daniel Pollock Peltzner, professor of English at Linfield College in the USA, who wrote in the Atlantic about the shutdown of Broadway, are as relevant as any. I'd been planning to take my students at Linfield College to a new adaptation of Measure for Measure at the theatre in Oregon this weekend. Instead, we're following the theatre's lead. We're continuing to wash our hands à la Lady Macbeth as frequently as we can.